Welcome to Kicking It Local, the podcast all about the football community in South Australia. I'm your host, Johnny Kecko, and today I am joined by a former professional footballer and a legend in the local game here in South Australia and played a lot of his time at MetroStars. I'm joined by Scott Tunbridge, mate. Thank you so much for joining me.
No, not a problem, Johnny. Thank you.
It's good to be chatting to you today. There's a lot of a long career we can talk about with you. You've played many games and scored many goals in your career, and I'm sure you've got a story behind every single one of them.
Yep, I've rarely got something that I don't want to talk about with football, so it should be fun.
Before coming onto this to chat with me, you've obviously had a listen back. You said off air that you've heard a couple of episodes. You've played with and also do some stuff outside of football now with a lot of my guests I've had in the past. One of them mentioning was Mark Talbot and also Simon Catanzaro. What's this community been like for you to be a part of this great community in South Australia?
Yeah, I think like anything in SA, it's a small world, so to speak. Or once you're in a soccer community, it is a small world. You said to me just before off air that you go to a game with Mark Talbot and you get stopped regularly. Yeah, it's like that at a lot of games.
Yeah.
You know a lot of people, and it's great that most people are willing to give back, like Mark. And people get into coaching and give back in a different way, like Lewis, Simon, obviously. That's his son. I coach his son, sort of like Lewis, so that's where I've mixed up there. So no, it's great to be a part of the football community.
It is a great community, and as you mentioned with Mark, he knows that many people in the game that anywhere you go with him, he's always getting stopped. You probably get the same.
Yeah. I've actually got a story about that. Not in regards to a player, but I was in Newcastle on a night out in the UK.
Yep.
And I bumped into someone who's like, "Oh, you're from Australia?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm from Australia." Oh, and they said, "Oh, we've got someone here that's from Adelaide." I was like, "No way, I'm from Adelaide," and thinking they just brought it down to the small world thing, and they got it wrong. Was what my immediate thought was, and it was actually Joel Porter's wife. Who I don't actually know, but it was just lovely, hearing of someone from Adelaide, and I wished him all the best. I don't know if the message ever got to him, but he was doing really well at the time. I believe Hartlepool, so small world.
Did you ever get to bump into him after that point or before that point?
No. I was playing in Scotland, so I was playing at least the 4-5 hour mark from where he was. So it was a completely random event, but just it's one of those things where the football community is so small.
It's it is very small. But let's talk about where it all started for you. 3 years old, it's a very young age to start football. What was it a football family that you grew up in?
Yeah, so my dad played football around the traps reasonably successfully, I believe, at the time. Charlie Tunbridge, I'd know him as. He played at Campbelltown, Salisbury Inter, Elizabeth Downs. He played around the traps. Yeah. So I got introduced to obviously football from him somewhat, and somewhat just my eagerness to be around a soccer ball. My family thought, okay, let's go down and play. At that age, 3.5, we all knew that the under 6Cs was 3 to 4 year olds, under 6Bs were 4 to 5 year olds, and then the A's were 6 year olds. So it was just a well known thing that's sort of how it played out.
Yeah, well, 3 year olds, they wouldn't be playing to any certain structure or anything, would they?
No, structure's a very loose term, which we've figured out now with the smaller pictures with the FFA's model. It was like what do they call it, ants running around, like in these little gaps. But
just here's a ball and you're running that way.
Basically, like I said to you, my coach used to say at half time, all right, the goal's that way now, and then goal's that way at the start of the game, and that was about the only instructions we had, which was perfect at that age.
Did your kids ever get to play that early, or did you wait a little bit longer?
Not that early. My son was doing, because now they do sort of development programs and things like that. So my son did something, or both my sons have done something in that space at a similar age. But it's a less game structure, it seems to be. So not quite the same thing, but they were into it at a similar age.
Would you say that 3 year old age to start in football is good, or is it varies on the person?
I just think if you're passionate about it and you're showing an interest, then there's no right or wrong age to get into it. Some enter like Batistuta was 17 or something like that before he got a professional contract. I don't think there's any right way. It wasn't it was just a time to get in of something that I showed and interesting, and yeah, that was it.
Yeah, well, your early career started at Elizabeth Downs, but Para Hills Knights as well was another club that you had your youth career at as well.
I did.
That's a club that your dad also coached at.
Correct, yeah.
So there's a bit of a connection there for you.
Yeah, somewhat at that time. Yeah, there was somewhat. I don't know if he played for him when he was a junior, or even in his adulthood.
Yep.
But yeah, I came from Elizabeth Downs, had a short stint at, it was called APAC then.
Yep.
And then went to Para Hills for most of my juniors before I ended up at Sassy. I have a really warm place in my heart. Para Hills, they're really good.
What's the background from your family? Is it an English background or anything like that, or is it not?
Yeah, my dad came from Dagenham in the UK.
Yep.
So that's a little town in London, really,
Yep.
I think. My mum was from Guernsey in the Channel Islands. So,
Okay.
yeah, both UK affiliated. They met out here after similar ages, moving out about 5 years old on one of the ships.
Yeah. It seems to be, because I've spoken about this in the past, how Para Hills Knights and Modbury Jets is another one as well, where those clubs are English based clubs. And a lot of people that have come from over in the UK to move here to Australia and Adelaide end up finding that place as a home. It seems like that's a similar thing that's happened with your family, having that connection at Para Hills.
Yeah, similar at that age.
Yeah.
I guess certain even suburbs then were quite
Yeah.
English or quite that. So often the teams around that area were
Yeah.
more predominantly English or Italian or wherever it happened to be. But yeah, so we travel a little bit more as you seem to get older into like your federation teams and that. But
Yeah.
at the local age, it was about convenience and that after school and being
Yeah.
so close. I'd imagine that had something to do with it.
Did you ever talk to your dad about that? If he went to that club for that that connection to his country, or not really? Did it ever a talking point?
No, not
No?
really. It was never really brought up like that. No,
Yeah.
it wasn't really a thing. Like he played for Campbelltown
Yeah,
later on,
yeah.
so there was no real reason as such as heritage to go there. It was just, I think it was just the closest club.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, that sounds bad. We didn't live far from there in Craigmore, so yeah, I think it was just one of the close clubs.
Yeah. So yeah, your youth career, you had that at Para Hills, but you also did Sassy. So what was the difference between having a youth career at a club, a traditional club as in Para Hills Knights, and then also what it's like being a youth player at an institute? How do you find the difference?
Yeah, I guess that's actually a really good question. I've probably never considered it quite like that. I guess with a club, there's either way you're playing for your team, aren't you? Really,
Yeah.
It wasn't probably until more the seniors where I understood club versus team a little bit more. Like I probably played for the weekend, if I'm honest with
Yeah.
you. Obviously, the professionalism went up somewhat. My dad actually coached me at Para Hills a lot of those times anyway, and I've told him since then he was probably one of the better coaches I've had through my career.
Yeah.
Even when being on trials and that, he was a very, very good coach. But just the amount of time you had to do it. At that time, Sassy was like 15, 16-year-olds, and we
Yeah.
were playing against 23-year-olds every week. And sometimes in the reserve league, you'd have these. I remember playing against Carlo Taladera.
Yeah.
I reckon he was at Campbelltown, or I could be wrong, but just first teamers coming back in general, playing against a 15, 16-year-old, you learnt things off them that sometimes you can't be taught. And as you get older in your game, you realise there's probably only so much you can be taught from your coaches, and
Yeah.
you have to pick up a lot through nous and understanding and watching others.
What was the structure like back then when you were doing it?
At Sassy?
Do you reckon that helped you having that platform?
Absolutely. There was so much that Sassy taught me about everything. To be honest, the story goes with Sassy. Martin Crook, could be a genius with how he handles kids and that, but I actually got offered what I was told was the last contract. It was not a take it or leave it situation. It was almost felt a bit pity.
Yeah.
Looked like you're so close. We haven't really got a spot for you, but yeah, like there's a contract there. Go away and think about it. And that's like, for me, that's red flag to a bull. Like I was really like, all right, I'll prove you wrong. And I don't know if Martin is a complete genius. I'd love to chat to him about it, rest his soul. But he offered that to me that year, and I remember just being so fired up to make sure I proved. the story goes, I played every game the next year and captain at the team after the year after. So with fortunate opportunities given to me by people going away with under 17s and things like that, where I wasn't quite so in that mix. But yeah, it was all I needed to spur me on, and whether he knew my character, that was really interesting.
Yeah, what's would be very that would have been very interesting if that was just a way to get you going.
Yeah, it definitely fired me up. If there anything you wanted to tell me as a junior, was tell me I couldn't do it, and I was all in.
That's fantastic. But then you obviously were able to do it because then you got your debut at Adelaide City in the NPL. Which led to the NSL. But what were those days like when you finally got the opportunity to go play at Adelaide City? Which was a big club back in those days.
Yeah, huge club. They had Australian nationals like playing in the first team, and a good 7 of them at one time. Like out of 11. That's astounding. When I went on trial, and there was, I think Damien Murray came up to me and introduced himself, and I'm like, of course I know your name, But I answered a little bit more humbly than that. Aurelio Vidmar was very similar. They were very, very warm and welcoming to just a trialist, really. Like these are national icons. Just taking the time out to say hello, I thought I've always taken that away with me. So. Yeah, I trialled there successfely, luckily. Actually, I heard Simon Catanzaro talk about how he scored from the halfway line on his trial, and I did the same thing on mine. So,
oh, really?
So I remember actually, I think it was Ange Costanza when I shot was like, yeah, okay, mate, like a little bit like, yeah, whatever. But I later found out that Zoran Matic had a rule about shooting from outside the 18-yard box, let alone the halfway line, that he didn't really encourage, or you had to get a license to almost do that. There are only certain players to do it. So the fact that I did it was almost a little bit against the rules, but I didn't even know they existed when I was on trial. So I just did what came to me, saw the keeper off his line and chipped him.
Did he ever talk to you about that or not?
Zoran?
Yeah, Zoran?
No, Zoran just had a go at the keeper.
What was that? Yeah, so when you finally got selected to be a part of the team, what was that like for you as a young player coming through and to get the opportunity?
Oh, phenomenal. The first game I played... actually, the first the game that I started for Adelaide City was sort of a long time, not a long time. I was 3 days into my NSL contract, to be honest. But I'd played in the Premier League, and that was my first game as a striker. But up until then, I was a midfielder. So until I went to Adelaide City, I was a midfielder. It was Milan Ivanovic who actually not turned us into a striker. In honesty, the story goes, I was sick one day and struggling, to be honest, in midfield to get around the ground. And he said, Scotty, just go up front for 15 minutes. We'll see how it goes. And, if you get more than that, great. Otherwise, we'll take you off and we'll rest you for next week. So I scored after about 10 and then scored for like 7-8 games straight. So then I was a striker.
There you go.
So to be even lining up at all with Adelaide City in the National League at that point would have been an absolute blessing, let alone, playing up front. So I was pretty raw with my knowledge of the position.
Did you thank him for that afterwards? Because you scored so many goals afterwards.
Not really. You know what? I was actually, and I am still a bit now. I'm still a bit ignorant to those around us. I wouldn't have known who I was playing with. Anyone that asked me, I'm pretty poor like that. I really just focus on my game. It normally takes a lot to get in my head and to know people around me. Really, it's just something I've always been a little bit like. Just worry about my game as long as that's done well. I don't worry about the rest.
Is that a strength of yours? You reckon that that you can do that? Is that what helped you?
Oh, big time. Yeah, big time. In the first year, particularly, because I just knew no one at all in the National League. In honesty, I supported Adelaide City, but we went to one game. It wasn't like nowadays you get Optus Sport every week or you get the A-League on every week.
Yeah.
I just didn't have a bar if they played for the national team. I didn't have a clue. So if there's some people that were defenders and they weren't in the national team, I didn't know about them, So... And probably the good thing for me was they didn't know about me either. So and there wasn't a lot of TV to be able to research what I did, how to put me off, particularly the first half of that season where I scored, I think, 10 goals coming to Christmas. So.
Yeah. Well, how would you deal with that? Because now there's so much analysis that goes into games where the coaches sit back, they watch the team that's about to play that weekend, then they go back to the players and say, this is what you need to do, mark this person. What was it like back then? Did coaches have to go and watch other teams interstate and stuff like that and come back and tell you, or how did it go?
I don't know the ins and outs really, if I'm honest. But
Yeah.
Zoran was very good at. He would always have. We had a game plan, and probably everyone in the state, in the
Yeah.
country, just about knew it. It was almost that well drilled, But it was just, it was well oiled and sort of hard to stop because we all knew our places. But he would give certain players instructions on common traits of other guys and stuff like that they had to worry about. But he rarely imparted that onto the young kids. He was actually pretty good like that. He kind of let the young kids just worry about what he wanted and not really too much. He sort of gave that to the older guys, which now I look back on thinking that's great. I probably wasn't ready for that. I was just ready to play my game, and how he encouraged it.
Well, the Adelaide City seasons that you played, the time you had at Adelaide City was seemed to be like successful for you. You played a few games there. You scored a few goals as well. But did you think that was the best place for you to start off your career?
In honesty, if I'm being completely honest, I remember when I had some probably failure issues with thinking that playing in Australia was a failure, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how we felt back then, that you needed to go overseas to be successful. That was the element of success. So I actually, to start with, had struggled with that. Struggled with coming back to Australia, and not that I'd ever left, but it's the perfect platform, the perfect pathway, the next step in anyone's career. I would highly recommend going into it. So to be able to play for Adelaide City was a dream that probably I didn't really consider. It's just at the start it was like, I'll do well, I'll go get a trial, and that'll be it. And hopeless optimistic that I am, that's how I thought it would pan out. So it wasn't actually. There's a story behind that actually. When I went over I trialled with Blackburn. I trialled at Blackburn Rovers when I was 17. I was fortunate enough to be spotted by a scout here.
Yeah.
I went over and another Aussie was there on trial at the same time. His name's James Johnson. So James Johnson's now the CEO of the FFA, I believe.
Yeah, Football Australia.
Yeah. So
doing a great job as well.
Really good job. Yeah. Really good. I have no idea of his background bar football at that age, so I don't know what he's obviously doing really well at what he's doing. But I remember him saying to me when I went over there, we were just having a chat, and it really dawned on me. It was one of those moments, like kind of those light bulb moments. I said, I basically said I pretty much had a trial sorted with Adelaide City, but I wanted to do this. And he said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "If I had a trial at Brisbane Roar, I wouldn't be here, or Brisbane, I wouldn't be here at all." It was one of those things I was like, oh, I hadn't really thought of it like that, I just had. The next step was to go into a youth academy, to go here, to go there. That was my sort of pathway, and it was kind of that moment that went, what am I doing? What am I thinking about? Why is that not an option that I've considered more? And then, as it goes, I went back, was successful.
It seems like that mentality hasn't really changed on some people, even to this day, because we see a lot of kids that want to go overseas to play for local leagues over there, and some of them don't make it, and then they come back here and they make their way into and play a couple of games in the A-League and then find their way back in the NPL again. But there's some that do go to the A-League and work their way through there and do an amazing job, and then get over to England. Do you reckon there's the mentality change? There needs to be something. Does that need to come from the early days to try and change that mentality?
I think a lot of the mentality is grass is always greener.
Yeah.
I think. I don't know about. I can't speak so much for now, but because I probably not across it as much as I was prior. But I feel like Melbourne comes to Adelaide to look at players. You see how many people from Newcastle are from Adelaide, that have gone there to go careers. I feel like Adelaide people, Adelaide United, we go to Melbourne to look at their local league in Sydney. I think it's a little bit that grass is greener type thing. A lot with some of that. So I don't think it's necessarily changed, or maybe it won't. It's maybe a stigma that's hard, but I think as the A-League has grown, it's a very good pathway.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously mine was NSL, but the only difference was a little bit of marketing and things like that. So it's a very similar pathway. Obviously the standard has grown as well now. But the standard is a perfect stepping stone. My advice would be to be wherever, if it is overseas, to try and get first team football.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing that you notice that you can change, even if it's Div 3 for England to get first team football. it's just the hard things to continue to keep that passion and drive to keep going. And depending on who you surround yourself with, that can be a bit of a challenge.
Well, how'd you find the experience of trialling for Blackburn Rovers? Was that successful in your mind, or?
Complete failure, if I'm honest. Yeah, no, it wasn't. It wasn't by any means. But how I felt at the time was I was a tiny fish in a massive pond, and that's when I went, oh gosh, I've got to go back and like face the music, so to speak. But later, I sort of was again. Oh, this is your narrow-mindedness when you're a player. That's just how I thought I was. I thought I was average. No, I'm no good. I've got to be back there. There's so many like me. But looking back on the experience, I trialled at Blackburn. When Blackburn won the league, they won the league final 4-0. They were the best team in England in the under-19s. So I wasn't trialling with any mugs. Like these were the cream of the crop at that time. As a team, as a unit. Maybe not individually. I don't know how many went on, but. To sort of look back with that adult mindset, which I didn't obviously have till quite a bit after, when the scout actually spoke to me and said, "Yeah, you got to think of it like that." That's and I still got referred. That's how I ended up going to Newcastle and somewhere else because I developed sort of a good relationship, I guess, in the short space.
The in hindsight now, do you reckon getting that knockback it was like very good for you for your career? After that?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. It was, I think from youth football, and this still happens to today, so 15s go to 16s, 16s go to 17s.
Yeah.
And largely I'd been successful everywhere, if I'm being honest. Even though I was last picked at Sassy and things like that, or, I'd always been selected for states. I've been fortunate enough to get into those.
Yeah.
So everything had gone well, although I was never number one in any of those teams. I was always seemed to be in and around the mark. So everything had gone well, and I think this is where a lot of youth sort of hit a wall when they get to the first team. Yeah, it's because they actually have to knuckle down more than they already think they're knuckling down, but they possibly haven't really had to knuckle down quite so much and pick up. And MetroStars, we had a good culture with that, where we, as the senior players, would nurse the younger ones through. Never give them our positions. There was no way that was going to happen. That's football, but give them all the tools that they needed to topple us, but they would have to fight for us just like we did. I think that's a good culture.
So when you came back to Australia after that trial, well, you actually did a couple more trials at Newcastle United, another club as well. So there was 3 clubs that you went and trialled with. How was that for you to not just only trial at Blackburn, but the other 2? Were they just as poor as you put it before, or was it?
Newcastle was a really good experience. It's a similar thing. A lot of the clubs, the age that I unfortunately went at, I just fell outside the under-17s and in the lower end of the under-19s at a time where a lot of squads had been full.
Yep.
So really I had to be Maradona, and if anyone knows me, I am Maradona. I would probably, in a trial format, I would imagine it would have been a tougher format for me to land, to land a contract, which probably proved its way in a way. I didn't have that flash and flair. I felt like I was more the first name down the team sheet that got shuffled around a bit with my qualities, rather than this this guy that you go, wow, what a player. That's just what I believe I was at. But it was a great experience, and that, although I got setback, that's what drove me on to probably more success.
Well, you went back to. You ended up playing in Adelaide City for a few years until they left the NSL. And that point there, you had to find. You're left with no club. You got to find another club. And I've spoken to other players that were in similar situations. But for yourself, how did you find that moment? Did you have a feeling that the club was going, or were you there till the last moment, or what happened for you?
Yeah, not a clue. Not a clue that anything was going to happen. Probably till the last couple of days there was rumblings. I can't even remember where I almost remember where I got the phone call, but not who delivered the message or how it was just kind of done. It was really done all of a sudden. It was I think a week out. It was a week out from the league starting that they pulled the pin. And then it was, I guess, fight or flight's probably the wrong word, but all of a sudden there was a bit of a something happening with Adelaide United and that. There was, after a couple of weeks, there was rumblings that, the federation or whoever put together Adelaide United, I don't know, the consortium that was coming about was trying to get off the ground as a rush job, and apparently been spoken to the FFA about entering later and all these sorts of things. But we had meetings and that, and it was a little bit he said, she said. We never knew whether that was actually good. We all know how it ends up. You know, like it was a very successful year. But I was faced with a decision at that point where I possibly go back to the local league, and after making inroads, that's not where I wanted to sort of go, and I was fortunate enough to have Sydney Olympic and South Melbourne sort of after us.
Well, the LA United thing, so you did have conversations with them about potentially being in there for their first season in the NSL?
Not Adelaide United directly.
No.
In honesty, a lot of it was like the senior guys chatting with the Adelaide City guys as a whole.
Yeah.
There was nothing with like who even found it? Was it Picard? Was he?
I think it was Picard. Yeah.
There was never a conversation from anyone like that where this is where we're at. It was more like Aurelio and Carl relaying messages at that time. And nothing that seemed concrete. I think a little bit with the PFA too. I think the PFA had a little bit to do it. But I guess maybe knowing now, I would have known more questions to ask and that. But I was a young kid. I didn't even... Yeah.
Still early in your career.
Yeah, like you think you know a lot at that age. But there were still certain, I guess... life lessons that I didn't know what questions to ask, let alone apart from, is it going to happen?
Yep.
They couldn't give me a straight answer. No one really knew, but it seemed positive.
Yeah.
I just felt like I couldn't have that chance.
Well, a lot of players were left without jobs then, because obviously it was a quick turnaround. But I don't know if you know enough or remember enough around that period to give it a proper opinion on this, but do you reckon it was handled well from that period where Adelaide, with the players, where Adelaide City disbanded or left the NSL and all these players had no club, and then Adelaide United was pretty much coming in as the saviour for some of these players? Do you reckon it was handled well with the players, or do you have a good enough memory to be able to...
I think it's best it could. I think it's amazing they even had a club. Like these players were probably expecting to play local league, and you had, Rio Vidmar and Carl Viet like playing locally. That's just bizarre. I think it probably was a little bit by design. I'd be speculating, but I think it probably was a little bit by design to hopefully that, maybe Adelaide, because there was going to be a new reform. It was a real well known that the A-League was going to have a reform the year after, and clubs had to meet certain criteria. Perhaps Adelaide City didn't meet those at that time, but it's I can only speculate as to sort of what would happen. But I thought the start of Mark 1, I think they ended up calling it Adelaide United Mark 1 or whatever it was a great thing. That's obviously we wouldn't have the club we've got for the state now if that didn't happen.
And some of those names have gone on to do some incredible stuff in their coaching career as well. But
very knowledgeable.
Yeah, and now you after that you end up going to South Melbourne to play in the NSL. That's one of your first moves away from home, because you did go overseas to trial in the UK, but playing away from home, how was that for you? Was that difficult?
No, I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved Melbourne. I loved the team. The club seemed okay, although we didn't have a lot to do with the board. The reason I went there actually was I was probably not loving it as much as I would have liked in the last few years, where or the last year at Adelaide City. So I kind of needed something fresh. So whether it was Adelaide United or South Melbourne, I had a lot of discussions with Dave Terminello actually, who played under the coach Stuart Munro, who was the South Melbourne coach.
Yep.
And a lot of positive conversations about the culture that he created, and that's what I felt like I needed at the time was that sort of culture and that sort of coach. I guess just kickstart a little bit more passion in my game again. And loved every minute. I actually played less, if I'm honest, but people were playing better in front of me. That was fine. That's part of what happens with football. I was probably the 12th man, so to speak, with a lot of games in there, but I was always felt valued, like I was a massively important part of their group.
When the A-League kicked off the year later, was there any talk of you going to an A-League club, or did you try and find something? Like, you ended up going overseas to Scotland, but did you ever try to get into the A-League, or were you looking around?
So immediately there was a 7 to 9 month layoff. It was huge, So what clubs were even going to be in there, I don't even think were talked about at the time. Stuart Munro had a connection with Scotland, and that's how I sort of ended up in Scotland through an agent. So at that stage, no. Later, I had an opportunity where I could have come back, but the inroads I was making overseas at that time were at sort of that swinging point where I, was on the verge of making moves to Premier Division clubs in Scotland. So, yeah, I was right on that tipping point where I felt like there was still unfinished business where I could have come back.
The how'd you find playing in Scotland? 'Cause you played in the second tier. What was that like for you? Was that a good experience?
Yeah, really good. As I said, I'm not really a trialist. I've always considered with the way I trialed. So the story goes, I was a striker at the time. No positions for strikers apparently, according to my agent, but midfielders there were. So being a midfielder from 7 till sassy days, 15, maybe even longer. I said, yeah, no, I'm a midfielder, and off I went, and went over to Scotland with a trial with a club called Hamilton Academical, which I thought was a joke because I didn't know much about Scottish football, and I thought I was playing for a uni side, but I was assured that wasn't the case. They'd just been promoted from Div 2 and had aspirations of the Premier Division, so I went over on trial. We went to a little under-19s tournament, which is renowned for having a fair few trialists go up. And that first game, I scored a left footer from about 30 yards under the bar and had a really good day. My second game, I scored a right curled shot from 30 yards, and the third game I scored a header. So I was on the phone to my agent saying, get something done. This may not happen like this for a while. So yeah, let's get this sorted, because I knew I have goals in me, and I'm never feared of that. But sometimes at trials, you're not in an environment where you know the strengths and weaknesses of everyone. So to be able to be in that position, they were happy that I was signing a goal scorer midfielder, and I was happy to be getting a contract. Actually, the funny thing, when I was over there, I remember, so I went over on trial the first day that we were on trial. They said, we've got an Aussie here actually as well. And I was thinking, yeah, righto. The same sort of thing as I was saying about Joel Porter the other day. You just feel like there's a bit of a myth about Australia being, sort of tiny or whatever, and that everyone knows everyone. But sure enough, I rocked up in the dressing room, and there was an Aussie sitting down next to me, and it was Ian Fife.
There you go.
Neither of us knew we were going to be there. And I was like, Fifey, how you going? He's like, yeah. So that actually, that was probably the best thing for that trial was, and that's I guess the experience of other trials is it's lonely and you don't have people to bounce off and just bring you back to normal. And both of us got a contract in the end. He did similar, scored a worldly one of the other games.
Yeah.
I think the heading was anything you can do, I can do better in the local rag. And it was a great experience. That was a little bit short of him than me. Yeah,
well, prior to that meeting with Ian Fife, had you played with him before?
My whole juniors have been against or with Ian. So, we were talking before about sometimes lines are blurred. I've played against Ian my whole life. He was at Modbury Vista, I believe. And it was the Downs versus Modbury Vista when we were really young. That was the rivalry. Yeah. So we'd always end up there or thereabouts come cup final time. And then, he was in the sassy days with me. He was one of the ones that went away with the 17s and that sort of era where we did phenomenally well. Probably enough didn't come through of that team that should have or given a chance. But we came second in the World Cup at under 17 level, which is just ridiculous. If you think about it now, that would be like worldwide news and the papers would be lined with it. But back then it was still that tiny little snippet that soccer sort of got at the time. But so I'd grown up with him, the whole way through. He played Adelaide City with me, everything I'd basically done with Fifey. So to see him sitting there in the dressing room was probably quite comforting for both, and just disbelief.
Well, he does. He's still in the local game now, coaching as well. So he's still a big name in the local game. But how long did you guys were there for a bit together playing?
So I ended up signing on. I actually did an injury. So the story goes of my injury when we were over there. We were there for about 6 months. I think he ended up coming back to Sydney. He ended up leaving, I think, at that 6 month mark,
Yep.
and coming back to Sydney FC. And I sort of stayed on at. I had a few clubs of interested in me. I was getting regular football. At that time, Fifey was probably a bit more in and out than I was, and I had a little bit of interest around us at come Christmas time from Kilmarnock and basically the top first division clubs and a couple of lower Prem Div, or so I'm told anyway. Of course, you never know how much is true, but that's the stories I was told. And I did my knee on December 29th with the January transfer window opening 3 days later. So we'll never know what would have happened. But at that time, the timing was pretty poor. And then I had to have a little bit to consider. I had an injury that was going to rule me out for 6 months. Not that it was a really serious injury, but because being so young, the advice was to stitch up my cartilage rather than take it out, basically. So,
how did that affect your career moving forward? Did it have much of an impact, or?
Yeah, probably from then, to be honest, I had a lot more niggly injuries. Until then, one of the single best things that had happened is I hadn't got injuries. I hadn't had anything, just 18 through 21, I'd had nothing. I had setbacks when I was in the junior days, but not at seniors. So, yeah, we actually had an AstroTurf pitch, like main pitch, in the Div 1. So we had that there. I don't know if I had anything to play with it, but to be honest, the injury that I had was somewhat a thing that had happened in junior days, that I could straighten my knee and it would be fine again, which I just was uniquely me. It just didn't straight this time, and that was me out. So it was just I was told cartilage, but I later found out that my knee dislocated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Jeez. Did you notice when you got back to playing again that it was impacted like the way you play, or you had to change a little bit, or was it?
Largely quite similar. I would say one of my traits that was really good was my shot power. I distinctly remember the time where I all of a sudden had shot power. It was in Sassy.
Yeah.
I finally bought boots that fit me rather than a size too big, because my feet had stopped growing finally. And all of a sudden when I hit the ball, I could hit it, you know, and I remember going, wow, I can hit a ball, and that sort of stayed with me because I didn't have to try that hard. But I think just having oversized boots, being, your parents aren't loaded, they have to do what they can, that actually helped me when I had really tight boots that I could hit it. And it affected that. That's probably the biggest thing that affected the rest of my game. Not really,
Well, during your time there, we mentioned, we were talking before recording this podcast about some of the players and coaches you had while over there. And now they've gone on to the EPL, and they're playing in and coaching in the top leagues. Like your coach at the time is now assistant coach at Chelsea. You got a player that plays in the EPL as well. Like, what's that for you? Like watching the EPL now and seeing the former teammates and coaches on the bigger stage.
Yeah, somewhat bizarre. Some more than others. James MacArthur, who plays at Crystal Palace, and he's been a bit of a stalwart there, to be honest with you. I used to pick him up for training, and take him to training. We have nights out and whatnot, trying to keep him in good stead, because he was a really young player that was playing in the side. I had more to do with him than James McCarthy, who ended up going on to Everton. And these are guys that have played, national team, Premier League. Just in honesty, quite bizarre. But there was a player that I played with, Graham Jones, who is now the Newcastle United assistant coach. He's been the assistant to Belgium under Martinez, Swansea. He was my strike partner, and he had an incredible influence on me. He had a really good... I'm not surprised that he's ended up in the coaching space. He had a really unique mind and a really succinct way to get his delivery across with the fewest words, if that makes sense. I guess that's succinct in itself anyway. And I remember one time actually that as a striker, I used to beat myself up at. I remember coming in one-on-one with the keeper, and the keeper saved it. I shot on target, the keeper saved it. And I was cursing myself for days, and I'll never forget that he came up to me and goes, Scott, sometimes you've just got to say well done to the keeper. Like, can they not make good saves? That sort of thing. And it was just one of those penny drops at the moments where you're like, well, yeah, I guess I did all I could. Maybe he's just done a good thing too. And he gave away the striker role because he was getting older, and he became the assistant to Billy Reid, who is now the assistant at Chelsea. Yeah. You could just tell then he had a way for words and that he'd end up in the game in some some form, and I'm glad that he has. I still text him now. He's a good guy.
Yeah. Sorry, I did say it was a former coach. I meant former player that's now a coach.
Yeah, well, Billy Reid was one too, so you hit the nail on the head for two.
Yeah, there you go. But that's cool. That's really cool because I see what it's like. I've been involved only a short period in the local game, and seeing players now playing the A-League, these young kids, it's exciting for me. So I'm like, I remember watching them in local, and especially as a fan when you watch local players, especially like someone like Riley McGree now playing for Middlesbrough. But for you, like, you had that connection. Does that, so when you watch that, and have you ever sit there with your kids and watch and go, I used to play with that person or anything like that?
Yeah, they get annoyed.
Yeah.
I sometimes joke, and I think, who was it that was playing the other day? It was just a young lad from Leicester. I think Luke Thomas, his name was. Oh, Tomo, I said. And they're like, you don't know him as well, do you? I said, no, I don't know who he is at all. But yeah, there's always, there seems to be someone I've always sort of played with. We played against Charlie Adam.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been a lot. It is bizarre a little bit, but it's like you said about the community earlier. It's a small, close-knit community, and you just be surprised how many paths crossed. Dave Carney was at Hamilton as well, who's now gone on to play for Australia.
Yeah.
And he was at Hamilton when I was there too, and ended up going to Sydney FC with Ian Fife. Yeah, countless memories of similar situations that happen, that I'm sure. If you spoke to Kata for longer, would have had the same chat. Maybe you did, and I missed it or got edited. But
I didn't edit anything that
one. So there's plenty of people with stories not dissimilar to mine.
I reckon I got to get a lot of my past guests in the room together to talk about stuff, because I want to get more interesting stories out of it, because there's it's amazing, like the stories that each individual person has are great, but when they get in the room together, because I've had the opportunity to talk to some of these people at like the celebration of football and that in the same room, and the story is just escalating. There's extra elements to it that one remembers, the other doesn't, and that triggers memories, and you can be there for hours.
That would be an exceptional idea. I was listening to your pod with Alex Mullen. I think the man picnic with that sort of situation would be the perfect format.
I might have to do it. I did mention to him we should do the what did I say? The
count
kick in the
me
picnic.
in, give me a seat.
Done. I might try and hook it up for next year, maybe. But let's go with the Hamilton though. Before you finish up I think you had 2 stints there, didn't you?
At Hamilton?
Yeah.
Sort of. Well, the first year I actually did an injury. I actually got released to do my rehab back home.
Yeah.
So it was a releasing of me as a player. I actually ended up top goal scorer there after playing half the season too, but I'd never got the trophy back. Someone else, Brian McPhee, actually, if you're listening, Brian, he ended up taking it because we ended up being joint goal scorers, top goal scorers. So, I ended up leaving there, coming back here. Billy Reid, who I spoke about, who's now the assistant at Chelsea, he took me back on in honesty, on the president's word that I was good for it because I hadn't finished my rehab.
Yep.
In honesty, so I kind of went on, from memory, it was like a short 1-month contract to see if I came through the injury okay. And then they signed me. So although I'd been announced to be signed, I think like behind the scenes, it was really only a month to month for that first one. He obviously believed in me enough that I got a final contract. And then later that year, I got released for a second time, to be honest with you. I was riddled by injuries a little bit that year. I never really got going. I had flashes, but nothing that was probably a 10 or so game stint. And then I got released at the end of that year. And before the end of that game, I just asked I'd always had a really good relationship with the fans, as I felt like I had at Adelaide City too, if I'm honest. But and I just asked if I could go on to be able to clap them at the end of the game, really, and to give me 20 minutes if he could manage it. The game meant nothing for where we're at. We'd sort of secured, I think it was second or third, because at that stage, first only went up. So I asked for a little bit of time, which he gave to me. And in that game, to be honest, every instruction that he was going to say to me was out the window, and I just played for myself, if I'm completely honest. And the manager before that, Alan Maitland, was the manager before that. And one of the best advice he gave me after my trials, where I'd really scored and done well, was when I got signed, I was almost too much for the team. And I hadn't scored and done some of those things. I did a lot of team things. And he pulled me aside one day and he said, this could really hurt me. I don't know if it's going to hurt me or help me, if I'm completely honest. But you need to be more selfish to be able to be better for our team. Like we need goals from you. We need those things that you brought in pre-season when you're on trial. We need that now. So it could hurt me as we could cop more goals because you do a hell of a lot of work for the team, but yeah, we need you to be that little bit more selfish. So I kind of took that mindset on, if I'm honest, for that last game, and went, yeah, I'm planning to say goodbye to the fans and play for myself a little bit. If I'm really honest, probably did everything but score, hit the crossbar, post, assisted people. I think I just had a generally. You can walk off some games and go, yep, that was a good game, and I felt like that. I felt like it was a deserved end at the time. Before I came back and I hopped about a few trials. In the A-League, I had a trial at Brisbane Roar under Miron Bleiberg, which, was really good. He basically said I wasn't what he was looking for, which I respected. And I still respect him to this day for that. He basically said, I signed Ante Milicic 2 weeks ago. If your timing had been different, you were that sort of mould that I could see happening. It's not, so thanks but no thanks sort of thing. And I really respected that. And then I went on to Perth. I trialled there for what was going to be a 2-day trial, and then the manager at that time that had me on a two-day trial got sacked that night, and Ron Smith came in, and then I was unsuccessful there, so I ended up finding myself without a club.
That was in pre-season?
Yeah, so this was before the season started with the A-League, before the season had started with... the season was due to start that weekend, maybe? It was that close, like it was weeks away.
Well, sadly, that brings us to the end of part 1 with Scott Tunbridge, but make sure you keep an eye out for part 2, and let's take a quick listen of what to expect. The best year for Newcastle Jets. They won the league that season, 2007, 2008. But for you personally, you only played 5 games in that year.
I was treated probably pretty poorly as a player. Probably one of my regrets is I didn't speak up about it at the time, because it probably hurt me in terms of my future career. But I was getting told I'd get to the start of training and it'd be Scott, Joe, John, you go over there and you go over there and train, the rest of you boys over here. And I was like, what do I do? And he's like, I don't care what you do, you just go over there. So yeah, it was something that as a human being I didn't respect him all that much for that, and probably don't have much respect to this day.
Well, Adelaide United, obviously closer to home in the A-League. Was there any talks there? Did you try initiate something?
Yeah, look, at the start I got told that I would come back and I'd be looked at. To be honest, I don't know how much of that was truth or not, which to this day I guess I'll never know.
Make sure you keep an eye out for part 2 as we talk about Scott's time at Newcastle Jets, and also we chat about his time at MetroStars, featuring in the FFA Cup and the National Premier League's Finals Series. That's all to come in part 2, and this was part 1 with Scott Tunbridge. Make sure you subscribe to Kicking It Local wherever you get your podcasts, so you can get a taste of the SA football community. Plus, follow at Kicking It Local SA on Instagram and Twitter so you don't miss any of the action. See you soon!